Watch your step as you walk off.
Just watch your step.
So, welcome to Hart Island. If you look over here, we have an osprey nest that is active during the spring and summer. We got an osprey couple that come back every year. There is also another nest down there. For any who didn't get my name is Ranger Athen.
And again, I'm Ranger Brian.
All right. Has anybody been on a ranger program before? We got a couple hands. Was it just Hart Island that you guys were on? Okay. Very nice. So for those who don't know, we are the Urban Park Rangers. We do a variety of programs that are free and open to the public every weekend. We operate across all 5 boroughs. Me and Brian here are in the Bronx, so we cover the entirety of the Bronx. We do programs such as camping, workshops like survival skills, canoeing, bird tours, and lots of other historical walks and tours. But yeah, if we also cover 2 other duties. We do animal response, so if there is a sick or injured animal in a park, you are welcome to call us, one of our nature centers. You can either dial 311 or call the Van Cortlandt, Crotona, or Pelham Nature Center. And we are also rule enforcement in the parks, so if there's rules being broken and that needs to be attended to, we attend to that. We just want people to feel safe and have a good time in the parks.
All right. So, like Ranger Athen said, welcome to Hart Island. I have a quick question before we get on to our program. How many of you, when was the first time you heard about Hart Island?
A year ago.
A year ago?
I mean, the tours, but before, maybe 10 years ago.
Like 10 years ago?
40 years ago.
4 years ago? Was it in the newspaper, online, on TV?
I was a chaplain at a hospital, and it's where people got buried.
Okay, so the movie with Michael Douglas in it. Okay, yeah, so we've heard of Hart Island through many, many different ways. The first time I heard of Hart Island actually was when we took over Hart Island. When I started this job, I never knew this existed out here until then. So that was my first foray into Hart Island. That was a little over 3 years ago. So I didn't know this island existed until 3 years ago. As you see, we had to take a ferry over here. It is quite far. So for my second question, I would like, if you could turn to someone new that you just meeting for the first time, or you could just turn to someone you came with. But I would like if you talk with someone new, who thinks they came the furthest today? I'm gonna give you a minute or two to talk to everybody, and then we'll get back to it.
Probably
Yeah,
not
who
so
came
far.
the furthest today?
Probably not so far. 118th Street.
All right, you could talk.
How about you? How far'd you come?
68 to New York City, and they bought it for $75,000. Doesn't seem like a lot of money, but back then that was a ton of money. And it started as a cemetery actually in the Civil War, but it wasn't an official city cemetery until the first burial in 1869 with Louisa Van Slyke. So she was the first burial here on this island. Okay. Since then, there have been a lot of institutions that call this island home. It's not only just the biggest publicly funded cemetery in the world, but it was home to a lot of institutions, which we'll be getting onto and talking about throughout our tour. The Department of Corrections ran the island for most of its history. They were part of Charities and Corrections up until about 1895, and then they split up. Charities went on their way, Corrections stayed here and kept running the island, as you can think. And why don't we get some of you from the crowd? What institutions have you heard of on this island? Have you heard of any institutions that were run here?
Phoenix House.
Phoenix House, yep, that was one of them.
Didn't they train soldiers here during World War I?
Yep, so the military was housed on this island during different times. So like I said, Civil War, we had some Civil War veterans memorial that's on the north side of the island. They trained troops here. The Navy occupied this island at a time, and they had missile silos, which are also on the north side. So yeah, the military was here. We had Phoenix House, which was a drug rehabilitation institute. We had a couple other institutions here on the island as well. I'm surprised no one has said it yet.
Boys' school, they built Sam.
Yeah, there's reformatory schools for boys here, for misdemeanant boys. I'm sorry, you said
TB,
tuberculosis wards? Yes. But the most important one that we'll get to, cemetery, yeah, so the city's cemetery, but there were also prisoners held on this island. So that was another institution that was on this island. So going on that, there are about 1,000 people interred here every year. It's not the case all the time. It depends. During COVID, the numbers went way up, but we'll get to that later on our tour. But beyond that, we're actually gonna come walk over this way and talk about some of the things we're seeing here. But while you're walking, please, take the island in, look at the nature that's around you. Just think about how quiet it is. Maybe it's nice to some of you. Maybe it's different than what you thought it would be. But we're going to be using voices from communities that were on this island to tell stories of isolation, like communities built in isolation. So there are people who we still have their stories, and we're going to give you their stories from their voices and some from our voices because we don't have recordings of them. So there were a lot of communities built in isolation here on this island. And that's what we're going to be talking about a lot today. So beyond that, let's walk a little bit. Like I said, there's some porta potties right over here. So if you need to use the porta potties, we're going to stop we run the tours, give the history. JPL is doing a lot of the work around here, and Human Resources helps us get our information, and they help us with the history as well. So behind us we have two things. We have this beautiful wall here, and we have an old building. As you can notice, there's not a lot of structures left here on this island. They took a lot of them down because they were just in disrepair. It would be more expensive to repair a lot of the old buildings than just take them down.
Almost impossible, actually, for many of them.
Yeah, almost impossible. But our chapel back here, given to us by the Catholic Charities back in 1933, some advocates decided, we're here on Hart Island. This is the city's public cemetery, the biggest one. And they wanted to leave the church up. So they advocated for it. So now there's some work going on with the church to keep at least the walls up. As you can see, they're taking down the roof, but I think they're just going to rehabilitate the walls so that one day people can walk around them. There's some plans in the works with that, but as with everything changes. This wall right here it was built from all native stone from the island. It was the superintendent's house at one point. So the superintendent of the island lived out here, and someone built this wall for him, and it was from rocks that were found from all around here. And it's one of the last remaining structures here as well. And you can kind of see like the outline where the house might have been. These trees kind of give you an idea of where the house might have been. And it's right off the dock, right? You're the superintendent. You want to make sure who's coming in, what's going on. So this wall remains to this day. So yeah, that's all we really have about these two structures here. If you want to take some photos of it. You see the Throgs Neck Bridge in the background. You see City Island in the background. But it's hard to get out here. So we're going to walk through these London plane trees off to our next stop. And if you need to use the restroom, please use it now, because once we get on the rest of the tour, we're not going to be back here maybe for another hour 50 minutes or hour 40 minutes. So if we have to take one of our rangers off to walk you back, you're going to miss something cool. We'd rather
City is built in isolation because this island has built a lot of unique communities and has had a lot of unique human interaction. But before we get into that, we should get into the history of why and how this island was built. Back there, Vicky and Adrian will have some photos, but basically this city started in about, I think the first photo we have is 1750, and during that time period, the city was about 50,000 residents. Fast forward 1797, 50,000 people. Then you fast forward to about 1850, suddenly you have 500,000 people. And look at that map there, and the city has expanded twice the size, and it's expanded into Brooklyn, when before it was just in the southern portion of Manhattan. And then the third photo that we have is, I believe, 1907?
1919.
1919. And that city has gone from 500,000 to 5 million. So basically every 50 years, the population is multiplying by 10. Now, as that is happening, this city is going from a small town, small city, to a very large metropolis. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I come from a small community in Ohio, and my grandfather was the town doctor, and he would do house visits. And basically the social services that was provided were provided by your neighbors, by your community, and you knew the people that were providing the social services. The same thing was happening in New York City. But as you expand from that small community and go to that large metropolis, those small town community services can no longer do the job to fulfill the community needs, which means that the city has to, if we want to come over here to the right, guys, we got a...
Oh, never mind.
Never mind. That's okay. We'll leave the road a little open.
But yeah, as the city is going from those small town services, it needs to turn those services into systematic services. Can we think of any system services that the city is providing nowadays? Can we think of any systems within the city? Sanitation systems, water systems, school systems, education systems, transportation systems. Yeah, all of the above. And that also goes for the burials. Now, during this time period, the burials were happening within the community. They were literally burying them in their neighborhoods. So many of the parks that we were burying people were or many of the parks that we have south of 59th Street used to be graveyards. Can we think of any parks that you might find?
Washington Square Park,
Washington Square Park,
Madison.
what, Gramercy, yeah, Bryant Park, all of those parks south of 59th Street used to be graveyards. And eventually, once the city got too big, they could no longer fit people into those areas, and it just became uncomfortable. So the city had to expand. So in 1868, like Brian said, they bought Hart Island here, and they started doing the burials here, and even moving bodies over here. And like places like Roosevelt Island, they were disinterred. When I say disinter, it means take the body out. Reinter means to move the body and bury it somewhere else. They disinterred bodies in these parks that are south 59th Street and moved them to places like here and Roosevelt Island. Now, just because people are, there's a lot of people are under the conception that many, if not most of the people buried here are unknown. That is not the case. It might have been more common in the 1800s and maybe early to mid 1900s when there were less documentation. But even then, it was not fully the case that if a person was not known that they got buried here. That was one of these scenarios in which you got buried here. But there are a lot of other scenarios in which that would happen. There were diseases happening. Many people were dying, and like the city had to create that system to get people buried over here. And also, the city was growing massively. It wasn't happening because of births, it was happening because of immigration. So many of the people coming here were from across seas. Most of their family and communities weren't here, they were across the water. So normally when you die, you have your loved ones to take care of you. Many of these people knew somebody, they always have family, almost everybody has parents, community, brothers, sisters, and the like. But sometimes family members don't have access or resources to help you out, and that's when the city steps in. The city will go step in and take care of your deceased body or your loved one's deceased body if you do not have the resources or the access to take care of that. So yeah, do we have any questions? All right, so we are going to move over to this wall. We've got some other photos to show for people being buried here. Basically, as we said, if like your loved ones do not have the resources or the ability to bury you, the city takes care of that. It is done in mass burial, and when we say mass burial, it's not a disorganized or disrespectful matter. It is very respectful. It is done in an orderly fashion. Anybody who is buried here, we know their exact location, and the city will cover costs if the body has to be moved, disinterred, and reinterred somewhere else. So the city covers that sort of resources, especially during the pandemic. A lot of people did not have access to come get their loved ones if they passed away in the city. So, even today there are disinterments still happening from a few years ago when that was going on. But yeah, it's very organized, very orderly.
Yeah, so like Ranger Athen was saying, the city will step in, and we have a flow chart of what happens to everyone who is not claimed by their family or who can't afford it. I'll come around to show you just the flow chart, but the city does cover the burial costs. Again, sometimes they're just circumstances that happen that a family member can't get to their other family member who has passed away, or they just can't afford a burial. We know burials are very expensive. it takes a lot of money to bury somebody, and the city will step in and do these services for everyone who lives within the city. Even if you don't live within the city, if you're visiting, they'll try to find a way. But I'll come around with this while Ranger Athens is discussing.
Yeah, some people even actively choose to be buried here. The nature, the isolation, it's very picturesque around here. Plus, as many people don't want the financial resources being invested into their burial like that, it's very costly to do it. And I have even heard that like the communal nature of being buried is very attractive to people. So yeah. But anyway, we've got a photo here of this wall of what it looks like on the other side. When you come on the North Tour, we often stop to get a view of what the island looks like. Can anybody read the words off of that sign to say it to the group?
Prison, keep off.
Prison, keep off. Now, yeah. There was never a prison operating on this island. It was the Rikers jail. These are, there has never been prisoners working on this island, but there has been incarcerated, jailed people on this island. So anybody who's worked on this island, they've never been charged, but they are set to be charged. Basically, as Brian said, the city bought this island in 1868, and the organization that used to be known as Department of Charities and Corrections turned into the Department of Corrections. So basically, from the city's founding, people who are jailed have been working on this island. Detainees. Yeah. They've been providing all the labor. They will bury the bodies. They will disinter the bodies. They did a number of other tasks on this island. There have been workhouses and such. In 2019, how much do you think that these people were making for doing burials? 50 cents an hour? Any other guesses? $1.50 an hour? 12 cents an hour? All right.
$3.
$3 an hour? How much did you say?
I said 20.
$20? $20 an hour? All right. Who is willing to do burials on a mass scale for $20 an hour? Any hands? All right, we got some hands. How about $1.50?
$1.50
For
an
free?
hour.
Okay. Well, the prisoners here were making about 50 cents. Now, by the nature of this work, not many people would do this sort of work for 50 cents. We got one gentleman in the back who will do it for free, God bless you. But these people were making 50 cents an hour. Now, by its nature, it's coercive, but this is one of the most sought after jobs to do because why is that?
Fresh air.
Yeah, not inside,
get
fresh
out.
air.
Leaving the building.
Yeah, getting to leave the building. Rikers is objectively an awful place that you do not want to spend a lot of time in. And getting to come out here and do those sorts of burials, it was really important work. The work that the detainees did on this island was very important to them, and they gave a lot of care for it. But it also had a psychological cost to it. I've got a news clipping here. I'm hoping that is a news clipping on it?
It is, and I will pull it right up.
Yeah. News clipping here of the psychological costs that it took on these detainees. The headline is Diggs' own grave. Workhouse prisoner says one for me, and then jumps from the window. William J. O'Neill, a Hart Island prisoner, told a companion, this is one for me, while digging in graves in Potter's Field yesterday. An hour later, he jumped from the third story of the prison. He was buried today in the grave he had dug. This is from the early 1900s. And the same sort of work has been going on ever since. We've got another recording here of, what's his name? Yeah, Kaz Torres.
His experiences.
Yeah.
If you guys want to move a little closer, we have an actual audio recording, and I know just now it got a little louder. So yeah, like Ranger Athens said, the voices of the actual people who worked on the island.
Oh no, you're good. I don't. If you want to hear, it's a pretty loud speaker, but.
My mother was an alcoholic and she couldn't take care of us. So I pretty much grew up in different types of juvenile institutions. And the day after her death, I was arrested for selling pot. I was released because the cops found funeral cards in my pocket. Sure, I was a kid, but that doesn't mean I necessarily had a childhood. And when I was in my late teens, I was arrested for a robbery. They moved me to Hart Island, a city burial ground where people who were too poor to afford burial or just unclaimed bodies, they're buried there. I initially was on the cemetery crew, and I would bury the bodies. I don't think I was ever at the breaking point, but I can tell you this much. One thing that took a little bit more effort to really deal with was the babies. It's just not something you should be seeing. I think back on it, and I just can't understand it. I don't see how this can happen, but at the same time, I do understand. I do understand there's things happening in this world that a lot of the public are not aware of. The people who are unclaimed, I think they would want somebody to remember them, as simple as that. I think they would want somebody to come and see them. I think they would want somebody to care where they're at. And I think they would want somebody to mourn them. At least one person in this world you want to love you. And I think everybody wants that.
So, as Kaz Torres was saying, like he put a lot of care and effort into this sort of work, and he was not alone in that fact. If you come on our North Tour, we've got one of the sites there is the Peace Memorial. It is a memorial built in the 1940s by prisoners themselves to honor the people who were buried here. And these detainees is also built a lot of solidarity and community off this sort of work as well. These guys had names for themselves such as the Death Crew, F Troop, and even the Baby Ghouls. Yeah. So it's morbid, but they took pride in the work they did and thought of themselves as a group or a community doing this sort of important effort. We are going to move along here. We're going to get a view of the shoreline, check out the nature, and hopefully meditate on what I was talking about here. And on the next stop, we are going to be talking about an organization that actually sought this island because of its isolation to create a community of healing.
So if you see these trees right over here to my right, the Phoenix House used to be located right in this area. Okay? So the Phoenix House was created in 1967 by 6 heroin addicts and a gentleman, Mitchell Rosenthal, who was the commissioner of the Addiction Services Agency in New York at the time. So they created the Phoenix House as a drug rehabilitation program, and they started that in a brownstone in Manhattan. But then they moved it out here to Hart Island, And there were no drugs allowed on this island, obviously. And I mean, just looking at the scenery and looking at how beautiful it lends itself to that rehabilitation. Okay? They weren't here for long. It only lasted 7 years until 1976. And then Phoenix House moved along. And they still exist today. But they're not in one big organization. They have different Phoenix houses, like the Phoenix House of Texas, the Phoenix House of New York. So they are still around and they are still helping people. So, as some of the activities that people did here for their rehabilitation, I mean, does anyone here like to garden? We all like gardening or plants in some aspect. So, there's someone named Jean Scott who started a garden here on the island. But I'm not going to tell her story. She's going to tell her story. And we have another recording from Jean Scott about the garden that she started and just all the help it was. So while Ranger Victoria is getting that up for us, maybe we'll move to the middle a little bit, move a little closer to each other so we can hear what Jean Scott had to say.
I wound up running the entire island. And I don't know, I was down in induction, giving a seminar one time, talking to the new people about staying and changing your life and all that other stuff. And there was a guy there from Ireland, and there was a guy there from Alabama. The guy from Ireland talked about planting potatoes, and Ralph Duck talked about this farming period. So I said to them, fine, maybe we should have a farm. Well, we sent away for the seeds, for the stuff, and they gave me $200 to buy some starter potatoes. Well, we didn't have no machinery, we had shovels. And Hart Island used to be a prison for people that didn't pay child support or people who got arrested for running numbers, short stay kind of stuff. And they had buried all of the big rocks under the ground. So as we're digging, we're coming up with all these rocks. Fagan taught me how to plant potatoes. There's a whole art. You have to put them in before St. Patty's Day. It's a whole ritual with this guy. He was a drunk, nice guy. So you dig the hole, you put a little dirt on the side, and you have to do the potatoes 1 foot apart. So you put your foot in the hole and you put a potato, then you put the starter potato. Well, I wound up with 2 tons of potatoes and 3,500 pounds of tomatoes and cabbage, big cabbage. So we were able to feed all of the houses for the entire summer. Kevin worked in public information, so he was able to get the news crews to come and take pictures of the farm and all of that.
So that was Jean Scott. And Jean Scott herself was a recovering heroin addict who became the clinical director of the program until she retired in 2008. So obviously the program was working and it helped at least Jean Scott start that farm, feed a lot of the houses here on the island. It's just something calm to do. So Phoenix House, was a big success. And before I move to the next thing Phoenix House was famous for, can anyone tell me, and I'm pretty sure somebody in this group knows, what does the Phoenix symbolize?
Resurrection.
Resurrection from the ashes. So that's their symbol. And you can see, they were just trying to help people who were down on their luck, who just got, the city, there's a lot of things going on, so you bring everyone out here, and isolation's not that bad. It helped a lot of people recover. And in that isolation, the Phoenix House also ran something called The Happening. So The Happening were concerts that were run here on the island for the number of years that they were here. So for the 7 years that we're here, Velvet Underground was a group that played here. And a lot of these concerts were pretty big draws. And, they were drug-free concerts. You're not bringing drugs here. If you were found with drugs, guess what? You're going back. You're not bringing drugs on this island. So a lot of these concerts were a big thing. And guess what? We also have a recording from somebody talking about those concerts. And once the pictures
So
go
that's the
around,
bubble,
we're gonna
and that's a
start
picture
that
inside the
recording
bubble.
and let you listen to
It's
that
like this
as
big
well.
blow-up tent. Yeah.
Society has changed because like more and more kids are getting hung up on drugs because they just can't take the society, and society's driving them crazy, and drugs is an escape from this. And all the society changes, we're just going to have more and more kids dropping out, getting on drugs.
The whole world is going to come to an end unless we can change a process that we're into now. And the answer is either that we manage to live together in a spirit of cheerful cooperation and survival on a basis of me and you instead of me or you, then that's the only chance that people have to stay on this earth.
Hey, you sit over there, you. It's a long earring, little sister, you're right there with you. You open your mouth, sing with us children here now. You come on here. Stop this thing here. I can't hear what's that. What you say? One more time now. Thank you very much. Come on. I can't hear you, children.
All right, so that was one of the recordings about the happenings that happened in the Phoenix house. And as you can see, just like today, there are a lot of problems that were going on back in the 70s. They were just trying to do something positive and bring community together so that they can break that drug habit. They show them, hey, there's music going on. They even held rodeos during these concerts, okay? So there was a lot of things going on here. And the Phoenix House was an important institution to bring that community together and to help people out. And again, out in this isolation, it was well worth it, because once you get back into the city, there's a lot of stuff going on, a lot of problems. They just needed a way, an escape out of the city, and this was it. So Hart Island is a very, very important place for many institutions, and I know it's sometimes looked at as like a negative place because that's how it's really spun. Hart Island is spun a lot of times very negatively, and we're here to demystify that. And we're doing that, showing you fun things that happen in the Phoenix house, to show you that some of the prisoners themselves, they got rehabilitated, and they chose this because of, hey, I'd rather be out here too than be in a prison. And yeah, I have to do this work, but at least I'm out in the open air. And they were doing, they were on stuff that was very small. They weren't on felonies. They were just misdemeanors. It wasn't anything big. So while we're thinking about the Phoenix house, I want you to think about some other communities that may have been disadvantaged back in the early 1920s, 30s, 40s, and beyond. And think about some places you would go that you would have fun. And then I'm going to ask you about that. So why don't we take a walk over to our next stop? All right, everybody. So we had a good question, a question I should have covered when I was over there, but a good question nonetheless. And I'm gonna end on the Phoenix House over here with that question. So the question was, why did the Phoenix House leave? What happened? So in the 70s, if you remember the 70s or you know everything about the 70s, we had a big fiscal crisis. That fiscal crisis means that the ferry could not run. It was too expensive to run the ferries over here, and the Phoenix House had to up and go. It's very unfortunate. I'm pretty sure that they would have loved to stay out here. It's very beautiful and it helped a lot of people, but you know, financial crisis has happened, and that's what ended the Phoenix House ultimately out here. But again, they do live on in other chapters, the Phoenix House of New York, of Texas, all over the country. So, on that note, the question I had asked you is, some places you have fun in the city or anywhere. What are some places you can think of that you would go to have fun?
Madison Square Garden.
Madison Square Garden, yeah.
Central
Rockaway
Park.
Beach, Central Park. Anywhere else?
Yankee Stadium.
Yankee Stadium. Now I heard someone talking to Ranger Victoria, and I heard one of the places, and I want us to think just a little bit more. So, for amusement, maybe to get a hot dog.
Coney
Coney
Boardwalk.
Island. Yeah, so we go to the beach, we go to Coney Island, we go to Rye Playland. But guess what? Not everybody back in the 20s and 30s was welcome at Coney Island and Rye Playland. So a gentleman named Solomon Riley in 1924 bought the southern 4 acres of Hart Island and was going to make an amusement park of his own for the African American community. He bought that for $35,000. Now keep that number in mind because that's very important. So he bought the southern 4 acres of Hart Island to build his own amusement park here for the African American community. Everything was going swimmingly until about the park's opening in 1925. So the city got involved. The Board of Aldermen got involved and said, you cannot have this theme park out here. Mind you, there was a boardwalk already, a dance hall, a wastewater treatment plant. This man had done everything. Solomon Riley had put everything out here already and was about to open. And they said, guess what? You have to close it down because they're prisoners here on this island. And what if they get mixed in with everybody else who's coming out here and get on a ferry and go? At that point, there was only a hedge fence keeping that side of the island away from his amusement park. So in 1925, he ended up having to shut down the amusement park. They tore everything down but that wastewater treatment plant, and he was awarded $144,000. Okay, that didn't even include the cost of the $35,000 he spent to open that park. So again, Solomon Riley was a big part of the African American community. Actually, his nickname was Millionaire Riley because he did so well for himself. So Millionaire Riley ended up doing a whole bunch of things for his community, but I have some stuff here to read for you about how important he was. I have a couple articles, so I'm just going to read them out to you because they're just articles that other people wrote and some of his words as well. So we're going to start out with Raleigh's Hart Island project turned down. The endeavor of Solomon Riley, a real estate dealer, to develop a summer pleasure resort on Hart's Island will terminate as a result of the action of the Board of Aldermen. By unanimous vote, the Board of Aldermen Comptroller Charles L. Craig was instructed to acquire the 4-acre tract which Mr. Riley purchased last year. This action followed a report by the Finance Committee last week stating that it was desirable for the city to acquire this property, which was close to the juvenile reformatory on Hart's Island and separated from it only by a hedge fence. It was believed that the escapees from the institution would be facilitated by the line of 60 motorboats which were to carry pleasure seekers to and from the island. That was the New York Amsterdam News, June 24th, 1925. Now, this is from an article from the Pittsburgh Courier, October 4th, 1930, so some time had passed. And Solomon Riley was going to build another development near the Throgs Neck, kind of resort development for the African American community. So the Throgs Neck is right over there. He wanted to build a resort right over there. So we move forward 5 years. In his words, there are dozens of beautiful places along our coast for white people, Riley said. But this is the only one where colored people can go without being exposed to snubs and insults. I claim we have as much a right as the whites to a bathing resort of our own, and I intend to stay with this and fight until we get it. So, it was hard back in those days. Look at how far out we are. He's trying to build something positive for his community, and the city was still against it. They're like, nope, you can't have that. But this man was trying to do something positive for his community, and, being the times, a lot of his things were just negated. There's one more article I want to read. This was at the time of Solomon Riley's death, just to show you how influential and how much money this man was worth. So, this last article, if the wind lets me read it, says, Solomon Riley dies in the Bronx. Wealthy realtor owned valuable property in Throgs Neck. Solomon Riley, who at one time was credited with being the owner of $2 million in Harlem real estate, died last Thursday after several years of poor health. The late Mr. Riley came into prominence in 1929 when he bought a pavilion and a parcel of waterfront property in the Throgs Neck section of the Bronx and announced his intention of opening a bathing beach for colored people. White residents of the neighborhood formed a vigilantes committee and fought the projects through the courts. The opposition of the whites, together with the Depression, caused the project to collapse. Previously, Riley had attempted to open a colored Coney Island on Hart Island, but this plan was upset by the city, which condemned the land. While he was a native to the British West Indies and had been a resident of New York State for about 30 years, during the Depression, he lost his possession of a large apartment building on Manhattan Avenue between 117th and 118th Streets. He resided in the borough of the Bronx at the time of his death. His widow, who was white, and a daughter, Miss Marianne Defense, are survivors. The funeral services will be held Saturday. So this article, I should have written it down. I thought I had it. I believe this came out in 1935, but you can find this article online. That's how I found it. But that was the time of his death. So $2 million in Harlem real estate back then, that's a big deal. All right, and he just tried to do positive things for his community at all times, and he was just met with so much resistance. But he tried his best. Everything happened for a reason, and he still was very successful. But he had to come all the way out here to isolated Hart Island to try to build a Coney Island for his people. So that's just another community, that came to this island looking for refuge and for peace. And obviously it didn't happen. So off to our next stop, we're gonna.
Oh, we have a picture. Yeah, we do.
Oh, we do have a picture of the wastewater treatment plant. If you want to see that.
We don't have photos of the actual amusement park, but when the city said you can't have this amusement park, even though they approved the building of it, right? They knocked it down, but they kept the wastewater treatment plant. I will say, Solomon Riley, I don't think he died in vain because he really helped kickstart the Harlem Renaissance. Millionaire Riley, he bought up all of that property.
All that condemned property.
point. We're approaching the most southern end on the island. Does anybody notice any differences between these graves and the rest of the graves we've been seeing?
Yeah, they're different. They're concrete. They're more.
They're concrete.
They're more close to each other.
And they're different.
They're more close to each other. Is there a date on there?
Mm-hmm.
This one, maybe 1885.
So all of these are from the 1980s,
Oh, okay.
1984. You might also see 2 letters and a digit.
Yeah.
SC8 over there, SC13. SC stands for special case. Now, yeah, I heard it, but yeah, these are all AIDS burials. They happened between 1983 and 1986. All of these individual markers have individuals buried in them, apart from the rest of the island. Ordinarily, common burial practice, it's deemed a respectful thing to get your own grave marker, but on this island, it is a mark of disrespect. These are the only people that are buried by themselves. They are on the most southern portion of the island, separated from everybody else. We do not know who these people are. These are among the few individuals that we know that are buried on this island that we do not have any records of. The records that of these people that were buried have been lost. We don't know if there was malintent or incompetence involved. We don't know why these people were buried by themselves. We don't know if it was because of hate, ignorance, fear, all of the above. Yeah. And by the oral history that we do have, all of these people are buried far deeper than anybody else on this island. I think they're buried over 13 feet deep. Ordinarily, the people on this island are buried 6 feet deep. And the reason that we heard that the people are buried in this way is because that's how far the backhoe would go. So, yeah. If you guys want to take a moment and commune and meditate on these graves. There is a misconception that it was the first child contracted with AIDS, but no, it was the first child buried here on the island that we know of who had AIDS. Does anybody have any memories from the time period in the 1980s?
Yes.
Yeah.
Chernobyl, that's my memory.
Chernobyl?
Sorry,
Yeah.
that's where I grew up.
That's a hard incident to go through also.
I was a hospital chaplain.
Hospital
And I
chaplain.
remember the families, the parents, so bewildered, just bewildered.
Yeah.
Why were their sons dying?
No, and there weren't a lot of answers being given by higher up administration. Any
And
other
docs
memories?
Doing everything they could. And
Yeah. No, we had a nurse that came here, and she shared a story of many of the nurses had no problem giving care to individuals afflicted with the people who were sick, but many of them were scared when they got that detail, but because many of them thought that they would not be able to enter their own homes. Their husbands would not let them into their houses. Yeah. during this time period, it was just like COVID. There was a lot of confusion. There was the information that we did have was not being properly disseminated or passed on to the public. There was a lot of fear happening, and like with this fear came a lot of stigma for people who had HIV, and with the stigma came isolation, and with isolation, the only way to fight that is through building community, taking action, creating activism to get changes and protections for the people that you love and care for.
And the dissemination of facts.
Dissemination of facts.
There's
There was fear-mongering, there was hate, and there were a lot of people fighting to make changes. And when we think of activism and when we think of public outcry, we think of often protests, or when things get extreme, even revolution. But for every major protest and every major social change, there is a lot of things going on underneath that activism in community building. You need people to cook meals. You need people to give hugs. You need people to make phone calls. Every major social activist group that has ever happened in this country has had those people underneath doing the groundwork to make sure that there is love and community in their organizations. And I've got a quote here from a person who was doing just that, talking about how they could not find somebody to take care of the burials of their loved one, or the burial of their loved one. About a week before Kendra died, we decided to begin making arrangements for her funeral and burial. I was a member of the Baltimore Task Force on AIDS, and at one of our meetings, the president of the Funeral Directors Association was there, and I realized at the time we were going to face a lot of discrimination. We began to make phone calls, and we were turned down. They either would not take her, or they would not offer the full services they offered anyone else. It took 26 phone calls to 26 different funeral directors before we finally found one who was willing to take her baby and bury her. We were given all kinds of stories. They would not embalm her. They would take her only to the crematorium. It would have to be a closed casket. There would be no viewing. I even had one who told me he would not accept her because he had her at home, and we would not properly bag her to protect his employees. One who was willing to take her wanted an extra $500 because of her diagnosis, and told us if we allowed an autopsy, it would be significantly higher. It was horrible. We had fought discrimination while she was alive, and did not expect to face that kind of discrimination at death too. Miss Betty Corey, Americans with Disability Act of 1989. Now, all these people buried here was between 1983 and 1986. By that time period, it was understood that you could not have the disease pass by air. It was safe to bury people. Despite all that, these people were buried individually, called special cases. There was a lot of fear, and the forces that be did not spread the information to let people know that they were safe and what precautions that they had to take, including the funeral directors themselves. The Funeral Association did have access to that information, but many funeral directors were still so scared that they would not handle people who had AIDS. This story was in Maryland. The same was happening here in New York. Yeah.
guess how high it went here? How many burials per year there were?
50,000.
Not 50,000, not that high, but if we look at, so average, I said they're about 1,000.
Yeah.
There were about
10,000.
8 to 9. So there was 2,300 burials a year when COVID hit. Now, that number was so high because we were forced into isolation. There was a lot going on. People couldn't get to their loved ones, okay? The funeral homes were swamped. You couldn't get anyone really to do a lot of these burials. And we all saw it on the news. A lot of the ice trucks that were happening, the funeral homes being overrun. So without people being able to collect their loved ones or to find a place for their loved ones to be buried, the city just started bringing them all out here. And to this day, there are plenty of disinterments that happen for COVID burials that, you know, people, they bring them to other cemeteries. But some people, like you all have noticed, that this is a beautiful area, they leave their loved ones here. It's, you know, yes, COVID was a bad thing, but when they see and they learn everything that happened and like where they ended up, a lot of COVID burials do stay here, and we get families who come out all the time just to, you know, give their respects to their loved ones. So we also have a little audio clip for this from, I believe her name, yes, Anita Perry is going to talk to you all about her COVID experience and why Hart Island is so important to COVID and the experience. So while Ranger Victoria is pulling that one up, here we go. We're going to get that going. And this is Anita Perry. So if you want to come closer just to take a listen, you're more than welcome.
About a 30-second clip, folks.
Yep.
Everybody needs a place to go to say goodbye. But right now, I know for a fact, my place is Hart Island, and I want access to it. I want a memorial put there for my best friend. Because I'm telling you, to heal New York, that's where it starts.
Yeah, so that was very short. That was Anita Perry. And yeah, that's where it starts. You know, having access to this island was so important to so many people. And it's why we're here. You know, people advocated so hard to get access to this island. And now we're giving tours. You know, people get to do gravesite visits with our PEP units. And that's very important. People have closure finally. So I want to go over like the burial process here again and just tell you that up until recently, every plot held 150 individuals. And how that would go is there was a left and a right side, so 2 rows, and it's 3 individuals high, 25 down, and that would be your 150. So recently, just to maximize space, they moved that up to 200 per plot. So it's the same thing except that it's 4 down now instead of 3. So it's still the 2 rows, 25, but 4 down, so it's 200 people per plot. And you see over here, the plots are a lot more organized. These are newer plots, and they have these like plastic PVC pipings, because you saw the concrete markers. Some of those things are very dilapidated. They're very hard to read. If you ever go on a North tour, you'll see what I mean. Some of them got broken. And even before those were put into place, there were wooden markers. And a lot of the wooden markers ended up going down in a fire. And now, you know, we know they're plots up on the northern half. We just don't have really records to where the plots were because they were on wooden markers. So as the years go on, they're trying to get this more and more down into a system. I don't know if you've noticed some of them, like this one behind us says end. So that is the foot of a plot. And they didn't, when I started coming here, they didn't even have that. So now they're at least putting like where the plots end, where they begin. And they have different orientations too.
So is this all one plot right here? Or
so each marker is one plot.
I see. Okay. So that's 4 plots.
Yeah, so each marker you see will be a different plot.
Gotcha.
The ends now. just demarcate where the end of a plot is.
Gotcha.
So you can see there's a lot of plots here, a lot of individuals here. There's always, again, disinterments happening. But again, a lot of people like to be here. They love their families here. They stay here because it's such a beautiful area. And unfortunately, we had to go through COVID. Things have kind of calmed back down, and it's back to that 1,000 per year number. But yeah, it was a lot going on. 2,300 people a year is a lot. I know some numbers were said that were higher, and I would have believed that too at the rate things were going during the COVID years. So what I want to do, I want to get us a little closer to the back of the chapel so you have a moment to maybe take some photos of the chapel, get to look at it a little closer, and then we're going to go to our last and final stop, okay? Do with the structure and its stabilization. So yeah, we're back here at the chapel. Again, the chapel was given to us by the Catholic Charities, and it was built all the way back in 1933. It was being used for about 30 years, and around 1966, so 33 years, they just stopped using it because a lot of the institutions that were on the island ended up going off island. So there wasn't like a huge need for an interfaith chapel anymore. But this is one of the last structures that remain here on the island. So why don't we let's take about 5 minutes if you want to take pictures or look at the plans a little closer of what they plan to do. And then we're going to head over. We'll gather you all back, and then we'll end our tour over there at the gazebo. Okay?
Thank you. Guys, have a good day.